welcome, Mark. Elaine is going to introduce you.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. I may call you Father Dowling because for some reason Downing and Dowling come together. But
Okay.
this is MJ Downing, and he's a Louisvillian. He has done an awful lot of things, and for some odd reason, he's decided to become an author. It's a midlife crisis, I guess. He's gonna, I don't know if you can see the cover of his book or not, but he's going to talk to us about writing. Actually, it's more of a John Watson than it is a Sherlock Holmes, but obviously John's telling the stories no matter which version one picks up. But I sent him some questions, but I'm going to ask you, Mark, do you want us to hold any other questions we might have till the end, or do you want to be interrupted?
Oh, you can interrupt me. It's fine.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to let you take it away.
Well, you can start with your questions if you like. Those seem particularly good to me. In fact, I might end up answering a couple of them at once, really.
Okay. The first one was, obviously you are a fan of Sherlock Holmes and Conan Doyle. What made you want to write your own story of Holmes and Watson?
I came to this after writing several things that were several different kinds of things, and it was sort of a lark, really. I have a friend with whom I was talking one night, sitting around a fire, and he's quite an expert on the Ripper murders. I'd been doing some investigation of the Ripper murders, and I asked my friend, who is also a zombie expert, I said, "So, Mike, how come people haven't done Sherlock Holmes versus the Ripper when zombies are to blame?" And it was sort of a lark. I thought he would laugh me out of countenance, but he said, "Well, I guess they're waiting for you to do it." And I said, "Ha ha ha ha! It's not my bailiwick. It's not something I've never been a fan of zombie stories. I've been a lifelong fan of Sherlock Holmes stories." But he said, "Why don't you try it?" He said, "You've got a good idea," because I kind of spooled it out with him a little bit. And he said, "Just do it." Well, I found myself working more specifically on a John Watson story than a Sherlock Holmes story. Yet I knew that I had to have Sherlock Holmes's presence there, because that's why people read those works anyway. He's a Victorian superhero, as it were. And Watson is typically his James Boswell, his storyteller, but I've always seen a lot more than that in Watson. And so as I began it, I guess it's 5, if not close to 6 years ago now, that I began that story. I found myself really invested in Watson's character more than Holmes, though I had to make sure that I got Holmes right as I could. And I had to make sure that I was true to the voice that Doyle gave us in Watson's character. I was really more interested after a time in taking Watson into a more three-dimensional arc so that I could show more of his growth as a person. It continues in the second book, and it reaches a somewhat of a conclusion, a kind of an immediate arc conclusion in the third book that will be coming out here fairly soon. Well, next year, at least. I hope next year. Let's see. I'll see if I can get one to hold up. If you hear growling, that's not the hound of the basketballs. That's my dog Grumpy. Here's the newest one. Hi, Deb.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Well, okay.
But this is the second one that was out in November, and that continues the character arc that I've started, and it's one that is centered on Watson's growth as a character.
I was very impressed with your finding Watson's voice. It was very much like Doyle, Conan Doyle's.
Thank
And
you.
how long did it take you to capture that? I mean, I'm sure you don't walk around thinking like Watson. Maybe you do, but I would have thought it was more than one try.
I do tell long stories, that's the thing that's kind of Watson like. I really worked hard to capture what I already knew of Watson's voice. You see, I had my first exposure to Sherlock Holmes stories when I was in the 4th or 5th grade, reading the Red-Headed League. Of course, all the really famous stories. And soon after, I got this book. My father gifted this to me, and it's been on my shelves ever since, and I've poured through it any number of times. I've always loved the Sherlock Holmes stories, and I consider them for a short time to be, sort of classic Victorian writing, and I found that it's really not. Doyle's voice is much more accessible, I think, than many Victorian voices for contemporary readers. And I think that there are things that I learned about him. His style, of course, is very linear. It's not nearly as florid or effusive as many Victorian writers. I suppose Doyle, in terms of his life, would be more of an Edwardian where he ended up, but still, I mean, he writes in that Victorian vein. And London is very much Victorian London for Doyle. But the thing about Doyle's voice, I think, was an amalgam of all of the depictions I had seen of Sherlock Holmes. And I had to write against the first depictions I saw of Watson when I was a boy in the Basil Rathbone movies. One of the worst criticisms I ever received on either book was that my Watson was similar to Nigel Bruce. I seriously contemplated quitting the whole game at that particular point in time. If I can't do any better than Nigel Bruce, I'm going to forget it. But it's a sort of a drawing room manner. It is well-mannered. It's articulate. The vocabulary is not out of reach of most modern readers, I think. And it's something that is, like I said, it seems sort of florid. It seems sort of effusive, but I think more than anything else, it's simply descriptive. One of the things that Doyle did, and I think this really helps make Doyle accessible to modern readers, and also help me work out his style, is he relies on dialogue more than most Victorian writers do. And that, I think, connects him to more contemporary writers. The people in the American tradition who were writing around the same time, or perhaps a little bit later, people that I was exposed to, like Edgar Rice Burroughs and different folks like that, more of the pulp writers, a lot of those writers were quite verbose. There was not much in the way of dialogue given. So I found that I wanted to give a lot of exposition and action, and actually, I guess, more motivation through dialogue. And that, I think, helped me with the voice, because one of the things that is essential to the voice is the interplay between Holmes and Watson. They have very specific kind of roles they play against each other, with each other, and in that company, I wanted to show the growth of Watson's character. So I took some chances. I took some chances with it, and I'm very glad you think that it's very like Doyle's. I worked hard on it, and I continue to work hard on it. And a lot of times I find myself slipping into a different kind of voice, and I have to pull it back. I have to continually think, how would Watson do this? How would Watson say this? So we get the presence of Watson's typical understatements, which are almost Anglo-Saxon, by the way, in their simplicity, and his excitement about watching Holmes at work. That's always something that you can do to get Watson's voice down, is to make sure that you see him, or you show him spectating for us on the work of this sleuth, this bloodhound, this superhero. So I guess that's where I would say to go with Watson's voice, or Doyle's voice rather.
How much research did you have to do about the Victorian era to get the city correct?
Mm.
And
the city was took much more specific research. I'd actually done a lot of work in Victorian literature in my PhD program that I started at U of L and sought to finish at UK. When I was at U of L, I took as many classes as I could in the Victorian era. Detective fiction was always one of the things that I wanted to study. I had a real interest in that. I had a real interest in looking at the growth of detective fiction from the, what do they call it? The roman de feuilleton, the French tradition, the chase, or the crime tradition. So I read William Godwin's, Caleb Williams. I read Mary Wollstonecraft's essays. I read Godwin's essays as well, and I read fascinating people. Wilkie Collins, another woman who doesn't get nearly the credit she deserves. Mary Elizabeth Braddon in Lady Audley's Secret is I think a seminal part of the growing detective tradition. Of course, you have Poe given responsibility for the first, what does he call them, ratiocinative detective stories.
Yes.
There's a funny little sidebar on that, actually. I don't know if anybody's ever noticed, but the science of deduction for Sherlock Holmes is a trick. Not just in being able to show how he does his little trick, but it's a wonderful trick by Doyle. He calls Holmes's method, actually he has Holmes call his own method deduction. And deduction is of course the ability to state with certainty, based on a true premise, that an individual conclusion or observation has a particular meaning. Most of the time, when you're looking at what Holmes is doing, it looks like induction, because he's taking a survey of all the little details of a person and putting them together into a finding, and say, "Oh, you must be a cobbler then," And of course, he's the person's like, "How did you know that?" And he comes back with, "Because you have this sort of scar on your hand, and this is on your sleeve, and your hat," and various things that he comes up with. And of course, he's always right. But really, what you've got in Holmes is closer. It's not really deduction or induction. It's merely abduction. It's the possibility of coming up with a favorable or plausible explanation for a series of details that explain the relationships between a series of details, but it's not. It is arbitrary. It's not totally true in all situations. And if you've ever looked at a Sherlock Holmes story and wondered, how that impossible encyclopedic mind of Sherlock Holmes can know that only this color mud that's on your left shoe comes from the post office at Marylebone and Baker Street, where they're digging up the pavement, and only that mud in this spot is that color, and therefore you've just been to the post office, Watson. That sort of thing is highly arbitrary. But when you make Holmes always right and you call it deduction, it sounds scientific. It sounds completely plausible. And it's really one of the best tricks I think that anyone's ever pulled off in fiction, because it always works. Why? because you always make it work. Then you call it science. My wife Amy and I joke about that because she's a real scientist. You know, she knows about science. And here I'm an English major, right? And she's like, don't talk about science. And I was like, well, I'm kind of loosely talking about science, but yeah, it's a writer's trick, and it's a good one.
Yeah. I know you throw in a bit of romance with John and the young lady. Why?
His wife and the young lady.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a triangle there. Why did you throw in the romance when you usually think of Sherlock Holmes and romance?
If you think of Sherlock Holmes and romance, it's coming through Watson. There are people who have estimated that during the course of the stories, Watson makes reference to, and I haven't looked at this, I haven't checked this out, but I've read that people have said Watson has something like 12 wives. I know. He doesn't name any but one of them. He names, of course, Mary, whom he met in one of the first stories. And so Mary's the one that we always associate with. One wife passes away in the interim when Holmes is supposedly dead. Okay. So roughly in 1891, according to that chronology, Watson's wife, whether it's Mary or whether it's a different one, passes away for reasons that are not historically provided, and then he's free to be involved in Holmes's adventures again. But various times after that, he's married and coming to visit Holmes in the old flats at Baker Street, and that's just part of it, I think. So Watson acknowledges that he has had romances with women on 3 continents. Okay, it's very much his character to be romantically involved. If a woman comes to Holmes for any sort of help, and if she is attractive in any way, Watson's going to know. He's going to be the one to tell us that. Holmes, of course, thinks nothing of it. There's only one woman for Holmes, and that's Irene Adler. And she's the woman. And at one point he says arguably the kindest, most wonderful woman he ever met was a poisoner from the Midlands. And she was quite devoted to her children, but killed several people with poisons. It was, he was very much, he kept himself away from any sort of emotional entanglements. Watson, of course, falls into emotional entanglements around every corner. He's, I guess for lack of a better word, he's a ladies' man. He is the one who always notices the women. And I thought that was in keeping with Watson's character. And I thought it was important for him, since I was trying to develop his character, to have some failures, to find or to illustrate some of his flaws in that way. I found that was one of the ways that I could break him open. In order to have a character become more, to achieve greater dimensionality, you need to show them growing, right? And so, one of the ways that we grow is through suffering. And one of the best recipes for suffering is paying attention to our basic tendencies and doing what we've always done without thinking about the consequences. And Watson does that in this book. And part of the character arc is to show that there are all kinds of consequences to this, all kinds of things that happen to Watson because of the choices he makes. And I guess it's a thing that is also part redemption in the sense of where I'm taking Watson. He finds a great deal more about himself through all of these adventures that I'm setting up for him. So yeah, they might have Sherlock Holmes in the title as a part of the marketing aspect, but they are really truly John Watson stories.
Mhm. I'm going to ask you about your, writing routine. We're still in the middle, or hopefully at the end of a pandemic. And, I've read off and on about writers who, oh my God, this was the greatest thing that ever happened because now I had an excuse not to leave the house. And then you also had the other ones who said, you talk about a writer's block, it was a writer's boulder that hit me. What about you? Did you find that you could write more or write less or anything about along that line?
I haven't really thought about that too much. I read that question. I began to think about it, and I thought perhaps the downside for me from the pandemic has been maybe a lack of productivity. I haven't completed as much stuff as I wanted to. The third book, I'm on contract for 3 books with Burns and Lee for these Watson stories, and the third book was due, and I was late on getting it in, and it was because we had a remodel going on in our house. We had a bathroom remodel, and in the middle of that bathroom remodel, I tested positive for COVID-19. Well, it turned out to be a false positive. I never had any symptoms, and the test was in July, and in September, I found that I had no antibodies. The doctor tested me and said, no, you've never had COVID-19. But during that period, I was supposed to be finishing up the third novel, and it took me a lot longer than that period to finish up. And I suppose I could blame some of that on the pandemic because it altered so many things that I would typically do. But when I retired from teaching several years ago, I started writing every day. My wife, Amy, there's Amy over here. Say hi, Amy.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Amy.
Good to see you.
Amy knows where she can find me all the time. I'm either at the gym, at my desk, or asleep on the chair, right? So I'm pretty dependable that way, Or she would find me, at my desk at the gym or at the church or perhaps at the coffee shop across the street from the church where I used to write a lot. But other than that, I've been sort of a creature of writing habit for a long time. Since I retired, though, I was able to concentrate a great deal more on writing. And even though I've worked, I think, the same amount of hours during the pandemic, I think that the stress on me, particularly the stress of having tested positive once and literally being here at my writing desk for 10 days straight, I got very little done. I watched a ton of Netflix. I read. Amy would leave lunch for me on the corner of my desk, and I would come back and eat it. And I would talk to her around the corner and things like that. So, I was very much here all the time. But I think the pandemic really knocked me down because it took away so many opportunities to be with people. And I love to write. I really, honestly, if I put more than 5 hours into writing in a day, my brain is fried. I cannot do it. I need to have some period where I'm being very creative. Maybe I can do good things for myself by working on one thing to create for a while, just to draft, just to cover story area, and then go back and look at either that piece or look at another piece that's in some aspect of revision. I don't mind working on several things at once. That's not an issue for me. I have a website, the MJ Downing verse, as I like to call it, that I'm trying to keep up, and I try to offer fiction as well as post. I try to offer more fiction on that than anything else. For those who have read the books, the additional fiction that I put out, they're going to find those there. Like in this book, there are 2 short stories that you can find access to. On the electronic version, you could connect directly to the MJ Downing website there and get some free short stories that go with this book. I like doing that. Number one, I always write too much. I always write about things that aren't really germane to the plot, and people are going, "Why is this here?" I'm like, "Because it's cool." No, it's not cool. It's leading us in another direction. Oh, all right. So I cut it, and when I cut something like that, I move it to the side somewhere, and try to return to it in a way to make it productive for somebody. My friend Mike and I talk about our tribe. About the geek type people who will read just about anything because it's cool. And I'm very much that kind of guy. You can lead me off into any number of rabbit holes, and I will simply joyfully go down them. And that's one of the big problems I've had as a writer is the discipline to stay with a plot outline. Not to just wander somewhere because it's cool. I was slow to appreciate that what I find cool is not often cool to somebody who's trying to get through a story. So all the extra stuff I work on, it oftentimes ends up, in a short story or in a different account. And I thought, well, why not? Let's make it part of the Downing verse, as I like to put it. So I don't even know if I answered your question. Now I'm kind of doing a similar thing, but.
No, you did, but I'm going to add on to that. You were talking about outlining. I write a bit, and I never outline. I sit down and it's there, and I write different scenes and pull them together. And hopefully that, like you said, I'm not taking somebody down the wrong street. But you mentioned outline. Is that something that you decided you were going to do when you decided to write, or is it a hangover from, or holdover rather, from when you were in school? And a lot of times those, the more academic writing, you generally have to outline first.
Yeah, I was not that guy. When an outline was due, I had to finish whatever I was writing and then go back and do the outline and turn it in. And of course, that gave me ways to make some changes, but I'm a terrible typist. I'm probably the worst typist going, and just individual fingers oftentimes. And the closest I come to outlining, well, I'll show you, is the whiteboard that I use. I don't know if you can see this. Let's see.
Oh, okay.
Here. I use, I guess I just start with outlines and kind of do, not an outline, but sort of a direction. And I plot things along that way. And it allows me to do what many mystery writers do, and that is to look at my ending and plot backwards to see where the important things need to be and where I can increase attention to the crime or to the situation, or where I can create more tension in the primary character, Watson. So I do a lot of that, but that's about as close as I come to actually outlining. It always confused me terribly. I tend to be, Elaine, one of those people that just sits down and writes.
Okay.
And yet, I find that when I'm at my most comfortable, I'm discovering things while I'm writing. I'm discovering what the characters are telling me about themselves. I'm kind of invested in where they want to go, and I found many surprising things about characters. One of the more surprising things that ever happened to me as a writer. This was a book that I think only Amy has read completely from beginning to end. It was a book that I wrote with a friend of mine. And this was one of the first things I ever finished, took through to completion. And it was massive. It was huge, 900 and some odd pages of manuscript. And it was a vampire story. Yeah. Amy says it's the Dostoevsky of vampire lore. And it was set in Medvedja it's over near Montenegro in No, it's not Poland. It's Serbia. So we had this quasi-historical document we were working from, and we each wrote a chapter at a time. Cass Johnson, a friend of mine, who wrote from one perspective. I was another in this investigation of these vampire depredations. And it was an exhausting sort of thing. And if it hadn't been for Cass, I probably wouldn't have been able to stay on track, because he is an outliner, a map maker. And he would say, well, okay, for the next 2 chapters or so, we need to be doing this, and I would say, okay, I can do that. I got my guy and I know where to take him in that line. So I depended a lot on Cass for his sense of where to go. But I also discovered things that were very surprising. One of the more amazing things happened was when I had killed off a character, because it was my intention of doing that right along. He had another character who had similar kinds of qualities, and I wanted to use him. And I said, "What are you going to do with Sergeant So-and-so?" And Cass says, "Oh, he's vampire food fairly soon." I said, "Can I have him?" He says, "What do you mean?" I said, "Can I have Sergeant So-and-so?" I can't remember his name now. And he said, "What are you going to do with him?" So I told him. He was like, "I like that. That's kind of cool." I said, "So I got him, right?" He's like, "Yeah, take him over. I'm just going to kill him. So now I won't kill him." And I said, "Okay, all right." So, those disposable characters end up telling you something about a story that you didn't know before. And it's only through that kind of discovery writing that I can do that. If I have to stick solely to an outline, I have an arc. I have a perceived arc where I know I'm going to go. And if I can get there with some of that discovery stuff going on as I write, when I write, I know I'm going to have to go back through it and tighten it up. I know that. The only thing I do like that are drafts. But I think it's the thing that keeps me motivated as a writer. I love that aspect of it. So I'm not real big on outlines. I use those diagrams to kind of tick off the places along the plot lines where I want things to go, and to plan better. But I need that sort of discovery-oriented writing like Elaine's talking about.
Now, the last thing I have, your biography says you're a certifiable Tolkien geek. Why didn't you write in the fantasy field? I know zombies and vampires are they kind of touch on that, but where are the frickin' elves?
Right. They're showing up in my work. Actually, if you check on MJ Downing's page, you'll see 2 Shire stories that are fairly recent. I can't go on with them in a professional way. They're only fan fiction, because the Tolkien estate has everything's, just sewed up. You can't use Tolkien's ideas, despite the fact that in his letters, he suggests that he wants other artists to do that. He wants other artists, musicians and writers and sculptors and painters to live in that kind of world. I've started doing some fan fiction, I guess because I knew I always would, but I know that I can't achieve anything but perhaps some readers for my website. Some people who say, well, this guy's got some interesting stories. Look, he's got a couple of Hobbit stories here. I've got a third one that I'm working on now. It wanders outside the Shire a bit. But the reason I haven't done anything, with the frickin' elves, as you say, is that Tolkien did such a wonderful job creating that world. When I work in Tolkien's world, I feel like I've entered a very sacred and holy place. I don't mess with things that tear up his borders or anything like that. I work very closely with what he has set up. I work within that world. For one, I know I don't have the capacity to build a world like he did. I have worked in the fantasy genre, and I hope to have a book coming out soon with Burns and Lee called The Bear Sun Tales. in which I worked with a hero from the ancient sagas in a kind of a pre-Viking era fantasy. And my agent Victoria had it circulating around last year, and we had a close hit with a bigger publisher, and they said, well, it doesn't read old enough. And I asked Victoria, I said, what does that mean? It's a young adult novel, right? And she said, yes, it doesn't read old enough means there's not enough sex in it. And I said, these kids are like 11 and 12 years old, right? So this is a coming of age novel. You know, it's not. He said, yeah, but if you're going to call it young adult, it has to have that sort of sexual tension in it. I said, okay, well, let's not call it a young adult novel. But it's a story of a saga hero whom we meet later on, fully grown in the sagas, and he has this amazing ability, and it's totally a fantasy ability. Bolfar Bjarki is his name in the sagas. And Bjarki can, when there's a pitched battle going on, Bjarki can go back to the to the rear of the battle, lie down, go to sleep, and manifest in his place a tremendous bear. And of course, you know, when a bear comes onto the battlefield, humans don't do very well against it, and so usually it guarantees him a victory. Well, I wondered what would be the case of young Bjarki learning about this ability. And so I have the first novel done like that. Excuse me, my throat's scratchy. I had the first novel done like that. And we're looking at perhaps Burns and Lee is looking at putting it out and kind of taking my work into a different direction, away from the Holmes and Watson stuff, which is a direction I would like it to go, because it's more my area. It's more where I want to work. I have a wonderful cast of characters set in that era that I've worked out, and I really like them. I like the story that we're working with. I like working with Bjarki and the discovery of these abilities, because his backstory set up in the sagas is one that's fairly rich with that Nordic tradition, and it has crossovers to other kinds of mythologies as well, to ancient Celtic mythology, certainly the European mythologies, and Bjarki, Bolfar Bjarki, is one of the types of characters that we see that's quite similar to Beowulf in the ancient stories. So, you know, anytime I've got a chance to tell a coming of age story, I will. And I suppose that's where I'm going to work in fantasy if I get the shot at it.
Okay. Now I'm going to open it up to anybody else with questions. Any kind of follow-up on this? But it's very informative. Thank you. And
All right, well,
I wish you luck in all of your Sherlock Holmes, and the frickin' elves is a term from, I watch an awful lot of British mysteries, and Inspector Lewis is set in Oxford, and of course that's, you know, and he's always, you know, saying he's not educated at Oxford by any means, but he's always talking about, oh yeah, another frickin' elf.
yeah.
Borrowed Inspector Lewis's term. Okay, open it up to the floor. Ladies?
Now, Mark, did you have any issue with using these characters that are already in existence in terms of, are they sort of open to anybody who wants to write about these people at this point, or do you have to get permission to write about a pre-existing character like this?
With Holmes and Watson, there was a case about, well, I think it actually happened 2 years before I started writing, when an editor started collecting Sherlock Holmes stories, and he was sued by the Doyle estate for not getting permission. And the Supreme Court actually found that the copyright law says, unless your copyright is renewed, you have 99 years past the point of original publication. So if Doyle had published something in 2000 or in 1921, I wouldn't be able to use that aspect of his work in mine because it's still covered with copyright. Okay, but anything 99 years later, and the first Sherlock Holmes stories where he sets up the basic situation with Holmes and Watson at Baker Street, with their coming together as these two men who needed to find ways to live affordably in London, and he sets all that up early on. I think even before the turn of the previous century, so that I was well covered by this latest Supreme Court decision. As far as the stuff in the sagas, I don't think there's any kind of, I've never been able to find any sort of copyright on folklore. It doesn't necessarily belong to one person. It's not the work of one person that's being parroted or anything like that.
Okay.
I suppose I could find out something. It could be bad, but I think in terms of if I use somebody else's story of Bjarke as a background and couldn't prove that I had drawn that from original sources, I might be in trouble that way. But I'll certainly suss a lot of that out before any attempts to publish the Bjarke story. But so far, I haven't found anything that suggests that I'm out of line there with copyright.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And do you have do you have folks who look at your work before you submit them to your publisher? Do you have a critique group or readers or?
I have Amy. Amy's pretty good at that. She's she does that for me. I don't usually have a great many things that I send out to a group of people. I will make sure that I have a pretty viable text by sending it to my publisher first. And again, Victoria Lee, she's not only my agent, but one of the founders of Burns and Lee, these people who took me on. She gets to read the story first and comment on it and talk about what sort of things Burns and Lee might like. And when I get a really good working copy of that, while I'm in minor revisions and editing, I'll try to get Amy to go through it. She's got a good quick
sound.
Yeah, she's got a real good eye for what's holding together. She doesn't miss a lot of things. If there are gaps in the text, she'll show them to me. I don't have a consistent community of readers though. I don't have a writing group. I find myself wanting just to spend more time writing, and I used to send things out to people just to solicit their responses, and oftentimes the responses I got were not all that helpful, and I could probably do with a group of readers. However, when I'm working on a deadline or something like that, when I'm trying to get stuff going, I'm going to primarily work with my publisher as a reader. Yeah. Because I don't have the luxury of time to just let something lie about for a while people are thinking about it. I tend to want their feedback quickly and to get back to it in a productive way.
All right. Okay. Does anybody else have questions? Well, this has been really great. You've done it's so interesting. When you taught, were you an English teacher?
Yes, I was a composition teacher. I was at Jefferson Community and Technical College, the Southwest campus, for almost 30 years. And before that, I was 5 years at U of L as a graduate assistant who was also teaching, and I worked part-time at U of L and at IUS as a writing instructor. Along the way at Jefferson, I did get to teach lit classes, the Brit Lit surveys, occasionally introductions to literature, things like that. Those were the candy that I got I did 5 sections of composition, they'd give me a lit. Oh, thanks.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
So during the early days of my writing, yeah, all my writing time was stolen. I mean, it was when I probably should have been grading, or I should have been paying attention at a meeting. And I would have, pen and pad, or have my laptop out, and I'd be writing dialogue or something like that. But for at least 3 years, I think I did that. I did have a reader at the time, a fellow by the name of John Lineberry, and he shows up in character name in the book. I made sure to lace those things in so that John would know I was thinking about him. He's a communications teacher at Jefferson, good friend.
oh, that's
And
wonderful.
he was one of the people who kept me moving, who said, do you have more chapters of this yet? And I said, no. And he said, well, I need more chapters. You've left me at a place where I went back to copy more and I don't have any. When can I get some more? I said, well, I haven't gone through them yet. He said, I don't care. Get me more. I'm okay. So I had him to thank for that. And that was a really good thing.
Yeah. So, well, obviously you must have been doing something right, or because he wanted to turn the pages and wanted more. So that's what it's all about. So
That I thought was a good sign. I was also encouraged once when Amy was reading the vampire book, and it was before we were actually married, and she called me up at, I don't know, it was in the middle of the night, and the cell phone rang on the bedside. It was like, hello, what? And Amy says, who wrote the chapter about the vampire stalking the man in the woods? I was like, why? She says, I just read that. I can't read this at night anymore. It's terrifying. I said, well, I did. That was my chapter. She said, you're sick. Hung up. So
and to think she married you anyway.
I mean, it wasn't for my money, She actually did that another time. She called me up. I don't think it was quite as late, but I'd written a novel, one of those 1 month things. You do a novel in a month, and I'd written it for Saraband Publishers, because I wrote at the coffee shop over there at Douglas Boulevard. And so I had 2 brothers, Ike and Ed Sam. And Ike was absolutely despicable, and he was my protagonist. And Ed Sam was the golden boy. Everybody loved him. And it was quite late at night, and Amy had a copy of the book after Saraband, I think, just looked at it and thought, well, this is stupid. And I don't even know if they read much of it, but they handed it back to me. And so Amy called me one night, and she said, are you going to kill Ed Sam? And I said, where are you? She said, I'm on page such and such. I said, well, I can't tell you that. Oh, click. So, I was gratified by that. I thought, well, if she cares that much about Ed Sam, that must mean I've done something right there.
That's a good sign.
Yeah. And she keeps reading. So that's always a good thing.
Great. That's great. It's nice to have an in-house editor too, an in-house reader.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. I try to only get her the best stuff. She's probably one of the only people who comments on my on the stuff that shows up on my website too. She's signed on, and when you sign up to get the email following thing, you get everything that comes out fresh. You get it immediately by email. And so I began to check with her to see if things had come out yet. And so now she has this wonderful thing of leaving comments for me, So
that's great.
Yeah, I can. She's probably the only person who actually does that. I've had 1 or 2 other comments, but I think Amy's been the one who's most consistently gone, hi there, good story, thanks very much. And I know then that the website is working, that it's actually populating the things it needs to populate. It doesn't automatically go to Facebook anymore, and I don't know why. It will go to Twitter, but I have very limited appreciation or knowledge of Twitter, and just have an account where things can flow on there. I don't know what possible good it can do, but there again, I have it, and it's out there. but I don't. Yeah, I try to stick to the writing stuff.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. Okay. Does anybody
I
else have?
apologize for one thing. I got frozen out. I don't know. Everything just stopped when you started
Oh,
talking. So Susan has kindly let me back in. So I missed a group there. So I don't know if anyone else has asked questions or what else is going on here. So I apologize.
that's okay. Well, we had a few questions. Does anybody else have any questions that they'd like
You
to
have a question?
ask?
Oh, Amy has a question. I'm not sure what it is. She has a
Okay.
question. I think she wants to ask if what sort of conferences you guys go to.
Okay.
Oh, because she's asking about me, because we ended up going to we were headed to Killer Nashville, of course, but that got killed by the pandemic. We did Magna Cum Murder in Indianapolis, and I think my question would be, what other conferences do you guys go to? Things that I might be able to get onto myself, because I think conferences are good places for me to network, to find folks like me.
Oh, yeah.
Along those lines, I wanted to ask you a question, and that is, where's the best way for us to follow you and find your work? I mean, I was searching for you, and I found you on Goodreads and on Amazon. Where do you have a website? I mean,
Yes.
where's the best way for us to get in touch with you? And
The
along the line of your question, I just wanted to say I usually go to the Romance Writers of America's National Conference,
mhm.
and I'm going to be at the Lexington Legendary Book Bash in August. And then I know that some of the other members have other conferences they've mentioned before that you might be interested in.
I'm jotting that down. You can find me. The best place probably to find me is the website, which is mjdowningsplace.com. Just all run together. MJ Downing's Place, no punctuation in there, except for the .com. That gets you access to the books that I have right now, the 2 books that are out, in addition to the short stories, which are labeled just short stories. And I also have a section called Fresh Fiction. I left a 10-part series on there last year that, well, my sister loved it. And she was one of my primary audiences for that. I asked her why she loved it, and she said, "It's just great. Just write more." Okay. But I have that sort of thing on there, and you'll see that I'm trying to do a lot of different things in fiction. So Lexington has a legendary book bash, and that's in August. Okay.
There's one in Louisville happening in July. It's the 7th or 8th year they've done this. It's called Imaginarium.
Mm-hmm. I've been to Imaginarium.
Okay, it's July 9th through 11th this year. And also they're resurrecting Magna Cum Murder, but it's going under a different name. It's going to be called Prime Crime. And it's going to be August 22nd through the 24th at the same location it's always been in Indianapolis.
That's a cool location in Indianapolis.
It's August, Carol?
No, October.
I was going to
Did I
say
say
that's
August? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
October. Always
Yeah.
near Halloween.
right.
I go to Malice Domestic, which is in kind of the Washington, D.C. area, and that's usually in June. And Mark, if your book, your fantasy book is for coming of age, if it's for young people or geared toward young people, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, SCBWI, has conferences, a couple of big ones. One is in the winter, which I'm actually going to online next week. One is in the summer in LA, but again, this past year have both been online. The Mid-South region of that usually has a conference every fall in Nashville. So that's just, another way to connect with people who, if you are gearing your book and marketing in any way to young people, that would be a good place to find to network there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we went to Imaginarium not last year, I guess 2 years ago, and I took part in a couple of panels, but there was not much action on the floor that year. We thought we would have more exposure to getting books out and things like that, and not so much.
That year they were holding it at the same time as the what's it called, the arts fair they have in Louisville every year. So, and it rained really bad, and they've moved it to, that was in October that year, and they've moved it to September, or I'm sorry, I'm screwing dates up again. They've moved it to July, which hopefully will bring more people in.
Right.
There's also the Kentucky Book Fair every year through Arts and Humanities. I think they tried to do something online this year. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, they moved it to online this year.
yeah,
It's usually in November, first, second, or third Saturday, and they open up enrollment. Susan, I think it was January of last year, or it's usually in January they open enrollment. You send information to them, and then they let you know in May whether you're eligible to attend. And we're going to try again this coming year to see about doing the Bourbon Anthology there.
Mark, there's also the Soki Book Festival.
That's what I was going to say, Soki.
Yeah, that's I did that one year, I guess the year before the pandemic hit, but that's another good one.
Yes, in Bowling Green, it's usually held in April.
Okay.
And then there's Sisters in Crime. They have absolutely fabulous meetings.
Yes, they do. They do. Right.
They try to latch on to the beginning, I think, of a lot of conferences. I think they do Malice. I know they do BoucherCon. They have a think into writing class the day before the conference starts.
Right.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for anybody who may have, wants to travel a little bit, Southwest Writers usually puts on an absolutely fabulous conference.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really, really want to travel, Bloody Scotland.
There you go. I'm game. Let me out of here. I'm done.
Yeah.
All right, this is the
We should all go
moderator.
there.
I put, this is Susan. I put Mr. Downing's website in the chat window. If you all can go to your chat window and see it. I could probably drop it into the minutes of our earlier meeting as well. But we're at 2:00, so I think we need to think about wrapping up, just for the sake of some of us who have appointments.
Right. Okay. And dogs and cats.
Yes, that's what I meant to say.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. This has been great.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mark, very much. Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Been looking forward to this for a long time. It's been well worth it.
Okay.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All
Okay,
right.
we'll see you then.
Okay. Good meeting you guys.
Bye.
Take
Wonderful.
See everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Lynn,
Thanks.
Yes.
Are you going to call me later on?
Yes. What time, Debbie?
It doesn't matter. I don't care. I'll be here.
Okay, I'll call you, but not right away. I need a little
That's
break
fine.
here.
Okay. Fine, yeah.
Bye.
I have to go out and get
You guys.
my honey some flowers. Okay.
Ah.
All right. Okay. Bye
All right,
bye.
bye-bye. Good to see everybody.
Good to see everybody.
Bye. Thank you,
Bye.
Glenn and Sarah, for joining from Florida.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
That was
Thank
great.
you.
Okay, bye. All right, I'm hanging up now.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.